Left, Right, in the Middle is made possible through grant funding by SRCI, the Student Research and Creativity Institute at Saginaw Valley State University. SRCI, your dream, your project, your research.
It is a myth that somehow or other the private market has failed to provide certain important services. And the government has had to step in response to an overwhelming public demand in order to provide those services. The reality is very different. The reality is that if you look at every program that the government has adopted in the direction of extending its scope, it took an enormous propaganda campaign by special propaganda groups to get those measures passed. There was no underlying public demand for those measures. On the contrary, the demand had to be created. It had to be developed. It had to be produced. And it was created, it was developed, it was produced by people who sincerely, I'm not questioning their sincerity, who sincerely wanted to see an expansion in the scope of government. Let me take some of the most prominent examples. Let me take the example which today is the greatest sacred cow of them all, Social Security. Was there an overwhelming demand for Social Security in the 1930s when the law was adopted? Far from it. There was no public demand for it. It had to be sold. How was it sold? By the slickest devices of Madison Avenue.
But it's especially fitting that so many of us from so many different backgrounds, young and old, the working and the retired, Democrat and Republican, should come together for the signing of this landmark legislation. This bill demonstrates for all time our nation's ironclad commitment to Social Security. It assures the elderly that America will always keep the promises made in troubled times a half a century ago. It assures those who are still working that they too have a pact with the future. From this day forward, they have our pledge that they will get their fair share of benefits when they retire. And this bill assures us of one more thing that is equally important. It's a clear and dramatic demonstration that our system can still work when men and women of goodwill join together to make it work.
Welcome to Left, Right, in the Middle. I'm your host, Scott. Today I'm going to be talking about what the economist Milton Friedman in that opening clip called the sacred cow, Social Security. You also heard Ronald Reagan speaking to the nation just before he signed a 1983 bill that made amendments to Social Security. And if you notice, Reagan extolled the virtues of both sides working together to get something done, something that our modern politicians should take note of. In preparing my notes for this show, I decided that I don't want to spend too much time talking about the history of Social Security, other than that 1983 legislation, because I think that legislation is key to where we are now. I would rather discuss the current state of Social Security, what the arguments for and against it are, and where it's heading as far as solvency and future benefits are concerned, although I suspect that some history will be weaved into the discussion. I would also like to address a couple myths about Social Security, because look, if you are ideologically opposed to Social Security because you don't believe in government programs such as Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid, well, that's fine. As I've said, everyone has a right to an ideology, and there's no right or wrong one. However, if you're opposed to it because you think that it's a burden on the budget or because it's going broke, you need to inform yourself.
So hard to treasure something that's so far from you. I never knew where to draw the line. What we became, I couldn't tell. We just got lost, reeling on the coast.
So, what is Social Security and what does it do? The Social Security Act of 1935 created the initial program, and there's been several amendments and additions to the program since. There are two main components to Social Security, and each has its own trust fund. There's OASI, which stands for the Old Age and Survivors Insurance, and DI, which stands for Disability Insurance. OASI pays monthly benefits to retired workers, beneficiaries, and to survivors of deceased insured workers. The OASI Trust Fund was created pursuant to Section 201 of the Social Security Act Amendment of 1939. DI pays monthly benefits to disabled worker beneficiaries, and the DI Trust Fund was created with the passage of the Social Security Act Amendments of 1956. DI became effective on January 1st, 1957. Medicare, Medicaid, and unemployment also technically fall under the wing of Social Security, but it's the OASI component that's the most discussed and debated, and that's what this episode is going to be examining. I think the first key point should be that Social Security should not be seen as a retirement fund, nor should individuals look to rely solely on Social Security funds upon their retirement. That isn't to say that if you live a Spartan lifestyle, you couldn't live off of the payments. For instance, the monthly maximum federal amounts for 2012 are $698 for an eligible individual and $1,048 for an eligible individual with an eligible spouse, meaning that a couple would receive $12,579 in 2012, and this is designed to rise slightly with inflation. And could you live off of this amount? Yeah, I'm sure you could. But as I said, it would probably be a pretty Spartan lifestyle. And what Social Security was created for was to ensure that the elderly weren't living in abject poverty, something that was a problem prior to the program's inception. In their book, Poverty in the United States, Gwendolyn Mink and Alice O'Connor tell us that in 1940, and this is 5 years after Social Security was enacted, 62% of adults aged 65 and older were considered living in poverty. By 1999, that figure had dropped to 10%. Moreover, the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, CBPP, reveals that a 1999 study found that nearly half of all elderly people, 47.6%, had incomes below the poverty line before receipt of Social Security benefits. After receiving Social Security benefits, only 11.9% remained poor. So there's about a 2% difference between what Mink and O'Connor tell us and what the CBPP report states. Either way, I think it's clear that Social Security has done what it was created to do, which is keep the elderly out of poverty. Look at it this way. If 62% of the elderly were in poverty in 1940, and about 48% still would be in 1999 without Social Security, then the market or the natural economy, whatever you want to call it, would have only pulled about an additional 14 to 15% of the elderly out of poverty over that 60-year span, whereas Social Security pulled about an additional 50 to 52% out of poverty. Now, in the opening clip, Milton Friedman stated that Social Security wasn't something that the American people were asking for, that it was forced on us. And he's probably right, but it can't be argued that the government has often mandated that we do or don't do things for our own safety or security. How about seatbelt and helmet laws, or age restrictions on alcohol and cigarettes, or drug prohibitions? I could go on. I could actually just get into the Patriot Act and name all the things in there that the government now says we have to do or that they can do to us for our own security. And these are ways in which the government has stepped in and said, this is what we think is not only best for you, but what is best for society. Now, I know that none of these things I listed decree that money be taken out of your paycheck. However, all of these things can cost you money, such as fines imposed if you get caught doing them illegally, and there's even the possibility of being in prison for failing to comply with these laws. Whereas Social Security is a program that will provide funds back in the future. The amount you will receive back will vary from individual to individual and depends on several factors. First and foremost, how long you live after you begin collecting. Some people will receive less than they paid in before they die. Some may receive more if they live several decades following retirement age. But I think what should be focused on here is that Social Security keeps 90% of the elderly out of poverty, as opposed to the roughly 48% that would still be in poverty without it, according to the 1999 stats. And I would argue that this is ultimately better for the economy as a whole, because if the extra 15% of elderly people were living in poverty, they wouldn't have the discretionary spending to place into local economies. And imagine for a minute what that would mean. Social Security doesn't just help the elderly, it helps us all. It's a benefit to society that happens to ensure that 90% of our elderly citizens can live above the poverty line.
Give me a sign and I'ma get it on. Maybe believing I'm the right one. Give me a choice, I'll do it right. I know you're weighing right, but now I'm falling on the point I could decide. I follow you into the night. Get me out of this place. Get me out of here. Get me out of this place
Now, I'm sure that many would say that they aren't opposed to Social Security. They like the fact that it provides the safety net that it does. But the trust fund is going broke, and it's too much of a burden on the budget and deficit. And I think here lies some of the greatest misinformation or misnomers about Social Security. First, let's look at the trust fund. In 1983, President Reagan and Congress acted to deal with the solvency issue facing the program. Beginning in 1975, the program began to pay out more than it was taken in, and it faced the possibility of not being able to pay benefits on time beginning in July of 1983. So there was an 8-year window here, and keep that number in mind as we go forward in the discussion. The Social Security Amendment of 1983 addressed the insolvency issue. And no, I'm not going to go into depth as to what was in the Act. There is a link to details concerning it at the show's website, lrtmpodcast.com. But in a nutshell, it adjusted various taxes, set up 4 separate trust funds for the 4 different branches of Social Security, and bumped up the age of eligibility. Another thing it did was eliminate the ability for many federal workers to opt out of Social Security, and I'll get into that issue later in the show. What these adjustments did was make Social Security solvent again and also created a means to produce a surplus in the trust fund, which would account for the looming baby boomer retirement. So you often hear politicians or pundits warning us that Social Security is broke. However, the reality is that the trust fund, and keep in mind that my focus is on OASI benefits, the trust fund for OASI currently sits at about $2.4 trillion, or $2.6 trillion, depending on which numbers you look at. And this is due to the 1983 legislation which provided for more FICA, which is Federal Insurance Contribution Act, and SECA, Self-Employment Contribution Act, receipts to be taken in than the Social Security expenditures were going out. It is projected by the CBO, which is the Congressional Budget Office, that the receipt surplus will end in 2017 and the trust fund will begin to diminish. And the CBO estimates that the trust fund will run out in 2038, at which time the program would not be able to fully pay out benefits due. And this is if there are no changes made currently to the policy. So I would say that Social Security is far from broke or in dire straits. We currently have 5 years until the trust fund surplus is cut into, and that surplus isn't due to run out until 2038. There are some predictions out there that have moved that up a few years. Let's just move it up to 2030. I still say we have plenty of time to address the issue. Now remember, in 1975 it was projected that in 1983 Social Security would be insolvent, and action was taken in 1983 to address it. We have much more time than they did 30 years ago. However, we definitely shouldn't wait until the last minute like they did 30 years ago. We've been hearing about the looming Social Security solvency problem for about a decade now, and we still haven't acted. It is time to address the issue. I just think that it should be understood that we have time to work together to come up with the best long-term solution, and any suggestion that the program is broke or doesn't work is either ignoring the facts or purposely misrepresenting them. So how can the solvency issue be addressed? An article in Forbes lays out 6 common sense principles that I think make sense. Number 1 is create a respectable minimum benefit for low-income workers, increase some widows' benefits, and create an additional benefit for the very old, say 85 or older. This has raised the retirement age, including the minimum benefit age of 62. An extra year of work would solve about 1/3 of the program's funding problems. More and more of us can work into our 70s, and a modern Social Security system should reflect that. It makes no sense for government to signal that we should stop working at 62 when we are likely to live for 2 decades or more. Number 3, protect those who work physically demanding jobs. While the percentage of older Americans who do manual labor is shrinking, those who do this work need to be protected. Long overdue reforms in Social Security's badly broken disability system would help. Number 4, increase contributions and reduce benefits for high earners. Everybody would still get some benefit. Social Security is not welfare and must retain its status as social insurance, but there is no reason why it can't be made more progressive. Number 5, preserve the defined benefit nature of Social Security. Add an additional savings component is a good idea, but the public is not interested in taking on additional risk with their retirement. Number 6, be absolutely transparent about benefits and structural changes. Whatever Congress does, there should be no surprises. As it is, many young people have no confidence in Social Security. Reform should restore their faith in this key piece of the old age safety net, but government should also be clear that in the future Social Security will only supplement and not replace other retirement savings for middle and upper income retirees. And this goes along with what I said earlier. Social Security is not supposed to be a retirement fund. So this article suggests, and keep in mind that Forbes isn't considered a liberal rag, this article suggests adjusting the tax code and the initial retirement age, as well as adding some additional protections to high-risk workers. And I don't think that Forbes is offering up any drastic measures here, but the politicians on both sides need to work together to make the tough decisions that will make Social Security solvent well past the 2030 to 38 doomsday date. The article mentions increasing contributions and reducing benefits for high earners, but I think that everyone should see a slight uptick in contributions. Now, this doesn't even have to be a full percentage point in contribution. It could be, say, a half a percentage point or less, but spread that out over a long haul, and there's trillions of dollars in revenue here. Now, where's the trade-off to raising contribution, which I think most conservatives will likely be opposed to? Well, you also raise the retirement age. And currently, you can receive partial benefits beginning at age 62. However, full benefit age depends on the year you were born, but it's around 66 or 67 for most people, and you are eligible for more if you wait until you are 70. Now, I know most liberals wouldn't agree with me, but I think that it is a good idea to push back the retirement age a bit. I would have no problem with seeing the initial retirement age pushed back to, say, 64, 65, and a full benefit pushed back, say, to about 68. I think doing that, coupled with adjustments and contributions, would allow us to project solvency easily a half century into the future. And let's be frank, people are living longer, healthier lives, and working longer, so I don't think that raising the retirement age a few years is too much to ask, especially if we know a safety net will be there for us upon retirement. But I also don't think that we should try to adjust it so that we can ensure solvency past, say, our children's lifetimes. I think that it's only natural that a program such as Social Security will have to be looked at and adjusted every 40 to 50 years, as long-term revenues can't be predicted. We can't exactly know what's going to happen 50 years down the road, but we can try to project into that. However, one thing that we need to do is not scream the sky is falling every time we get a few decades out from a possible solvency issue. So I've discussed the solvency issue, but what about the effects of Social Security on the budget or the deficit? Well, the easy answer is that it has no effect on the budget and doesn't contribute to the deficit. It's basically a pay-as-you-go system. However, it isn't quite that simple, at least where the deficit is concerned. This is because the federal government has continually borrowed against the money in the trust fund, Republican and Democrat alike. So many would say that there isn't even actually a surplus, rather IOUs. Since the 1983 Social Security amendments, Congress has decided to borrow the surplus instead of investing. They've been using it to help pay for things that have nothing to do with Social Security. Things the political establishment and tax-averse Americans wanted but didn't want to pay for. Invasions, education, highway repairs, etc. And without giving any thought to paying the surplus money back. The federal government has been trading it for special treasury bonds that politicians used to assure us we're safe in a lockbox. Now in a down economy, the trust fund is cashing in on some of those bonds, meaning the federal government has to borrow money, usually from China, to cover the bonds. But this isn't the program's fault, it's everyone's fault. We want things like roads and education and wars, yet we don't want to fund anything. So this is what we get. We balk at any talk of raising taxes to pay for anything, yet we don't deny that we want these things. Christ, we lowered taxes and started 2 wars a decade ago. In the history of our country, we have never not raised taxes in a time of war. But we now have a society that even refuses to pay for war. Let the next generation do it. Look, Social Security only contributes to the deficit in that the government has to borrow money to pay back what it is owed. Currently, the federal government owes OASI $2.6 trillion, which is basically the same amount that the surplus should be. And I don't want to hear that it's the liberal spending that has caused the borrowing. Republicans have held the White House 18 of the last 30 years, and Clinton had a budget surplus the last 2 years he was in office that was cutting into this deficit. So I don't think that it can be denied that both sides were sticking their hands in the cookie jar, and it's likely the conservatives were up to their elbows in it. But now they would like to demonize the program after using it as a fund for them to stand behind tax breaks for 3 decades because they could borrow from the fund for revenue. Well, now that bill's coming due, and instead of facing the fact that this money needs to be paid back, the alternative that they seem to be facing is we should just kill this program.
My dear, I'll give you 60 seconds to disappear. And if you don't get out of here, who knows? Cause I've been trying to find out if an angel bends or breaks. Oh, showers like a stone.
Before I move on to talking about the issue of privatizing Social Security, I want to quickly digress and comment on an article titled The Next Great Bailout, Social Security, by Alan Sloan, senior editor at CNN Money. This article epitomizes the poor reporting that has been done concerning Social Security. I only need to read a short paragraph of this article to give you the gist of how pathetic the reporting is. Here's what Sloan said, and this is from July 30th, 2009. Perhaps as early as this year, Social Security, at $680 billion, the nation's biggest social program, will be transformed from an operation that's helped finance the rest of government for 25 years into a cash drain that will need money from the Treasury. In other words, a bailout. Now, if you have paid attention to what I've said over about the past 20 minutes or so, then you know that Social Security doesn't actually cost anything in real terms. It's a pay-as-you-go system. In fact, Bernie Sanders, independent senator from Vermont, stated that Social Security has never contributed a single penny to any deficit in the 76 years it has been around. Social Security is sustained by a dedicated payroll tax that fully funds the program separate from annual discretionary budgets. However, by stating that Social Security is at $680 billion, the nation's biggest social program, Sloan's cleverly trying to insinuate that this is all on the taxpayer's back. Yet, in his next breath, he says that Social Security will be transformed from an operation that's helped finance the rest of the government for 25 years. So what is it, Mr. Sloan? Is it a program that costs us money or a program that funds the federal government? You can't have it both ways. But the icing on this load of bull that Sloan is trying to feed us is his last line in the paragraph, when he asserts that Social Security will become a cash drain that will need money from the Treasury, in other words, a bailout. No, Mr. Sloan, it's called repayment of debt. The Treasury owes $2.6 trillion to Social Security. But I guess you just forgot to mention that in your article. It's far from a bailout, but nice try. You know, when I pay my mortgage, I'm not bailing out my credit union, I'm paying back my debt. This is real shoddy reporting from what should be considered a reputable source. And it came from the senior editor of that source, no less. Reporting and editorializing such as this is what keeps us from moving forward on not only this issue, but nearly every issue. Alright, so off of my soapbox and onto the issue of privatizing Social Security. So if you are a conservative, you're likely in favor of privatizing Social Security, or at the least, making it so that you can opt out if you choose. I personally don't like the idea of privatizing, but I'm not opposed to an opt-out clause. But there is a gray area here. If you opt out, this means you will not be able to collect OASI, which is the Old Age and Survivors Insurance. But does that mean that you also aren't eligible for disability should something happen to you and you can no longer work? You know, these are things that have to be considered. Now, there have been and still are some instances in which groups of people or individuals are eligible to opt out of Social Security. Prior to the 1983 Social Security amendments, most career federal employees, as well as many teachers, policemen, and firemen, did not pay into Social Security, nor were they eligible for benefits. They were enrolled in government pension programs. The 1983 legislation allowed a grandfather clause for those employed before 1984 to still opt out of Social Security if they chose to, but those employed after that could not. There are also a few exceptions that allow some people to opt out, such as, of course, the federal employees hired before 1984, state or local government workers, police officers, firefighters, and teachers hired before March 31st, 1986, and participating in their employer's alternative retirement system. Ministers may choose whether or not they will participate in the Social Security program. Self-employed workers with an annual net earning below $400, election workers earning $1,000 or less a year, household workers earning less than $1,500 a year, college students working under federal work-study programs, graduate students receiving stipends while working as teachers' assistants, research assistants, or on fellowships, and most postdoctoral researchers, and individuals who are members of certain religious groups such as the Amish and Mennonites. And there are also 3 counties in Texas, that would be Galveston, Brazoria, and Matagorda counties, that have controlled the private retirement plans for the last 30 years for their employees. They opted out of Social Security before Congress changed the law in 1983 to prevent others from withdrawing. There's a New York Times article titled How Privatized Social Security Works in Galveston that discusses kind of the pros and cons of this. It's quite a long article. I'm going to read probably about the last third of it and just certain excerpts from that. So it says, in 1981, when Galveston County employees pulled out of the Social Security system, the program was projected to be insolvent by 2010, said Rick Gornto, the designer of the alternate plan and president of First Financial Benefits, the company that manages the retirement accounts. People in Texas are very independent-minded, and they stepped out and challenged the system. In the alternate plan, retirement benefits are a direct result of employee contributions. In each paycheck, employees contribute 13.9% of their gross pay, 6.1% from the employee, 7.8% from the county, to a private account. Picks up a little bit later in the article. At retirement, employees in the alternate plan can choose to take money in a lump sum, take monthly benefits for a given time period, or take a lifetime annuity with slightly reduced benefits. Social Security is subject to whatever rules the federal government makes, Mr. Gornto said, and there is not a guaranteed promise to pay any certain amount. This is my sidebar. There isn't a promise to pay any certain amount for any kind of retirement benefit. I guess with this particular one, because this is actually a pension plan, I guess there is. But I think when we're talking about privatizing Social Security, we're more so looking at putting money into markets and kind of going with the whim of the market and what your investment account is. And of course, if it's invested pretty conservatively, you stand a pretty good chance at a decent return if you invest it over the long term. But there's no guarantees. So back to the article. Critics of the alternate plan say it is more like a savings program than a social insurance program for all Americans, which Social Security was created to be, particularly for low-wage retirees, widowed spouses, and children with deceased parents. People forget that before Social Security, there really were poorhouses, said Eric Kingston, co-director of the Coalition of Social Security Works. The General Accounting Office in the Social Security Administration conducted the most current comparative studies of the alternate plan and Social Security in 1999. The GAO report noted fundamental differences in the purpose and structure of the two approaches. Both the GAO and Social Security studies concluded that lower wage workers, particularly those with many dependents, would fare better under Social Security, while middle and higher wage workers were likely to fare better, at least initially, under the alternate plan. Americans should not fear radical cuts to Social Security, Mr. Kingston said, because the program is politically protected. Americans contribute to the system. They value it very much. Mr. Kingston said, and they expect a return at retirement. Any changes that are made have to be made by politicians with that in mind. Changing certain rules like scrapping the cap on Social Security taxation or eliminating Bush-era tax cuts for the wealthy would help solve the revenue shortfall, he said. Less and less money has been subject to Social Security taxation, Mr. Kingston said, because most wage growth has been for high-income employees who are not taxed for Social Security on earnings above $106,800 a year. But proponents of the plan say individual ownership of retirement benefits offers employees more security. You have some kind of control of your money because ultimately it's your money, said Dwight Sullivan, the Galveston County clerk. Although both programs offer disability insurance, life insurance, and retirement benefits, experts agree that the method and benefits provided by the programs are difficult to compare. In a hypothetical calculation, Mr. Gornto said an employee who earned $25,000 annually for 40 years could retire with a 20-year payout of $2,297 a month under the alternate plan. Under the same circumstances, an employee making $125,000 annually could retire with a payout of $11,490 a month. So that works out to about $27,500 for the employee that made $25,000 a month. So you're making a little bit actually more in retirement, and $138,000 a year for the person making $125,000 a month. So actually even a little bit more of a percentage up than the lower wage worker. But keep in mind that's a 20-year payout. You retire at 65. At 85, you're not making any more money. I'm hoping you're saving and investing that money that you're receiving over that time, but at that point you're cut off. Social Security doesn't cut you off until you die. Social Security benefits, this is back to the article, Social Security benefits change depending on the yearly adjustment for inflation, the year of retirement, and the age of the worker, but at a maximum, a worker who retires in 2011 at age 66 could receive $2,366 a month in Social Security benefits. So that's about the same as what the person making $25,000 a year would be making. And if you made $80,000 a year for life and you make that may seem like you're kind of getting gypped, but I've said it a few times, you shouldn't rely on Social Security as your retirement package. Social Security is there to ensure that you don't become destitute when you retire, that if you don't have a retirement package, if you don't have any kind of pension, if you didn't invest, that there's something there for you so that you don't go into the poorhouse. That we need to take care of our retirees and our old people. It's just something that a civil society should do. So anyway, back to the article. If Congress voted to privatize Social Security, Mr. Gornto and Mr. Holbrook said that they would recommend using a banking model similar to the alternate plan, but with one important caveat. They would suggest removing the option to withdraw funds in a lump sum. Most people can't handle a sizable lump sum when they retire, and they end up spending on a new house or new cars and everything else, Mr. Holbrook said. So this is interesting. They would favor restricting how people receive their money. The whole purpose is that it's your money, you should be able to invest it, and you should be able to get it when you want. But yet here they're saying, well, we want to privatize Social Security, but we want to kind of limit exactly how they can get those funds in the end. So the article goes on, the lump sum option is one of the biggest problems in the alternate plan, Mr. Kingston said, because people end up unprotected. If retirees do not choose a lifetime annuity, they would outlive their benefits and end up wards of the state. When the article goes on here, it's going to say even Mr. Holbrook, and it doesn't tell you who Mr. Holbrook is, but he was actually a judge in Galveston County, I believe, and the part of the article I didn't read mentions that. So it says even Mr. Holbrook has outlived his alternate plan benefits. When he retired 15 years ago, he decided to receive $1,500 to $2,000 from his alternate plan account every month for 10 years. Now his alternate plan account is empty. Fortunately, Mr. Holbrook has other savings and ultimately $1,300 a month of Social Security benefits from his 27 years of contribution before his county dropped out of the program. It was a mistake to only take it for 10 years, he said. It should be over a lifetime, like Social Security. And that was Mr. Holbrook. And that's how the article ends. And, that's kind of a telling case right there. This is somebody who's a big proponent of privatization, yet he did have, because he had worked 27 years contributing to Social Security, he had that $1,300 coming to him a month. And the plan he paid into only paid him for 10 years at $1,500 to $2,000 a month. So that wasn't enough for him to retire on. He needed the Social Security as that safety net. It wasn't his retirement fund. It was his safety net. And this article mentions that the middle class and the higher wage workers are going to benefit more from a privatization plan, and that the lower tier workers obviously are going to benefit more from Social Security. Well, because that's what Social Security is for. It's the safety net. If you're working, say, at a Walmart your whole life, you're not putting any money away. You're not saving. You're not investing. You're barely scraping by. So then what happens when you turn 65 years old and you have nothing but Social Security? At least you're still going to have that to survive on. Now, if you're working, a job making $60,000, $80,000 a year, chances are you are putting money away for retirement along with the Social Security. So you're just going to have a better retirement. It just only makes sense to me that we should have that safety net. And I think even the judge, Mr. Holbrook, kind of agreed with that. He says it was a mistake to only take it for 10 years. Well, if he stretched it out over 20 years, over 30 years, well, then he's getting less of a payout a month. He was only making, it said, $1,500 to $2,000 a month for the 10 years that he was in his retirement plan. And granted, he came into this plan a little bit late, obviously. So, I don't mind an opt-out option. If there's an opt-out option there for those who choose it, that's fine. If you think that you're going to have that security when you retire, if you're going to have that type of job that you're going to be able to put enough money away, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that at all. But I don't see any kind of benefits to actually privatizing Social Security in general, to making it that everybody is at the whims of the market. Imagine if George Bush would have been successful, this is George Bush II, would have been successful in privatizing Social Security. What happened, it was about 3 years after he was really making that big push, is when the market collapsed in 2008. I know my own father-in-law had quite a bit of money invested in different things, and he lost a lot of money. But he has other retirement things that he's doing. But he said he lost a lot of money. I bet you a lot of people lost a lot of money they were counting on retiring on. But at least there's Social Security there for them, right? So, I think we need to get off of privatizing Social Security. But we can definitely have a discussion about finding ways of letting people opt out if they choose. But just remember, if you choose to opt out, you choose to step away from that social safety net. And, it would be hard for me to see somebody who opted out of Social Security and then they're 70 years old and either their investments fall through or they just didn't plan correctly and now they're destitute. I'm not the type of person that's going to say, too bad, sucker, that's it, that's all you get. I would say let's find a way to help them still. But they didn't pay into the system for 50 years. Is that fair? I guess I'm just such a bleeding heart liberal that I still say we need to help those people. And I would imagine most conservatives say, hey, that's your own fault. But I don't know how we could possibly run a system where we just let our old people fall through the cracks just because they made poor decisions, especially when those decisions may not necessarily been a poor decision. They decided, hey, I'm for privatizing Social Security, so let's do it. Let me invest my money. My investments run afoul, and I have nothing. That's why, and I guess I can't stress this enough, that's why there's the safety net. Social Security isn't a retirement system. It's a safety net to ensure that you can retire with some kind of dignity, that you can at least afford to pay the bills and to live a meager existence when you retire.
1, 2, 3, go. I've got an ego, it won't let me go. What am I gonna do? A, B, C, D, paranoia's killing me. I'm dying on me aching feet. What a way to go. Roll up. People always roll up. So why don't you grow up? No, thank you. Big cats, small cats, some cats are bad. Those cats are bad cats. What you gonna do? There's an awful lot of people in the world today. There's an awful lot of trouble on the streets today. It really doesn't matter what you do or say. If a change is gonna happen, don't get in the way. A change has gotta come before too long, I know. Peace has gotta come, well I could be wrong, I know. But I just don't know what I can do, because you don't trust me and I don't trust you. That's what you think, 'cause you know I do. Why have you got secrets? 'Cause I know you have. Got something to hide, then it must be bad.
An article published by the Cato Institute titled State and Local Government Retirement Programs, Lessons and Alternatives to Social Security. The Institute discusses ways in which privatizing Social Security can work, and I thought this was pretty interesting. So part of it says that the overall performance of many state and local programs that cover employees outside the Social Security system is difficult to quantify. However, studies have been conducted that provide broad findings on the merits of state and local government programs in comparison to Social Security. William E. Even and David A. McPherson conducted a study published by Third Millennium comparing 7 non-FICA defined benefit retirement plans with Social Security. The 7 retirement systems analyzed were selected to represent a wide range of plans in terms of membership, geographic location, and state versus local administration. This study found that non-FICA plans replace a significantly higher percentage of pre-retirement income than does Social Security. They estimated that for a given earnings history, the average non-FICA pension paid a benefit between 3.3 and 7.5 times the annual benefit of Social Security. These general findings are supported by a 1994 study conducted by the Department of Labor, which surveyed employee benefit plans in state and local governments and obtained representative data for 15 million employees. That study provides broad findings about the benefits typically provided by state and local retirement programs and includes information on workers who are outside the Social Security program. What you have to keep in mind is that what this is referring to is state and local pension retirement programs. These are government pension programs. As it said, that it really couldn't quantify how Social Security stacks up against private programs, private retirement. Being that they are public, it's the taxpayers that are funding usually around half, if not more, of these pensions. Again, a privatized Social Security system would be at the whims of the market unless the government mandated that companies guarantee pensions or that they had some kind of, FIDC backing of your retirement funds. How to think that would go over in conservative circles. And my father worked for GM for nearly 40 years and took an early retirement when they wanted him to transfer for a second time, something that he just really wasn't willing to do at that age. Taking an early retirement, but that he forfeited part of his pension, that's something that he chose to do. However, a few years after he retired, GM and the labor unions came to a new agreement that took half of my father's pension away. So it's a good thing that he has Social Security to rely on, not to mention the Medicare that he receives through it. Now, private pensions can be renegotiated, meaning that you might not have what you thought you would have upon retirement or possibly a few years after, such was my father's case. These are things that we have to consider when we talk about privatizing Social Security and relying on either private sector pensions or the whims of the market, because we don't all have government jobs that are going to give us these guaranteed pensions. And this brings me to something that Dr. Eric Trump, professor in the Political Science Department at SVSU, brought to my attention. Given that these are public-funded pensions that these people are receiving, public-funded pensions generally come from local tax dollars. Whether it's a county or state tax dollars. You're a worker that works in a county for, say, 40 years and you retire and your pension was funded. You were probably putting a contribution in, but state and local taxes are being put into that pension fund also. So what do most people do when they retire? Especially, say, if you're from Michigan. Well, you're going to move. Let's say you move to Florida. Well, you're going to get your pension check sent to you now in Florida. You're going to be spending that money in Florida. But where is that money coming from? That money was coming from tax dollars in Michigan. So these pensions, especially like state and local government pensions, they don't really work to serve the local community. And I didn't do any kind of research as to say what percentage of people move away and where this money goes. But just really think about it. Most people are going to move someplace when they retire, and if they're going to begin a state or local funded pension, that money isn't going to go back into that community. So, maybe we should look at any time there's any kind of state or local pension fund, that should be something that's actually at a federal level. So that really just expands this out to the federal, and what is Social Security but a federal program? And Social Security at least is equitable in the fact that if you're paying in the Social Security, it doesn't matter where you go when you retire once you start collecting, because you're not really going to be bilking a community that was paying 40 years into your pension program. One last thing I would like to discuss concerning Social Security is public opinion. I'm not a big fan of public opinion polls, but it really depends on how the poll is done, who does the poll. This one was conducted by the National Academy of Social Insurance. It comes from an article titled Strengthening Social Security for the Long Run. And of course, you can link to this at the show's website, lrtmpodcast.com. And this was conducted in 2009. The section on this that I'm reading is, you can find it on page 9, and it's titled Americans Support Social Security and Are Willing to Pay for It. And it says, a recent survey by the National Academy of Social Insurance and the Rockefeller Foundation found that Americans are willing to pay for Social Security for several reasons. because they value it for themselves, 72%, for their families, 75%, and for the security and stability it provides for millions of retired and disabled Americans and the children and widowed spouses of deceased workers. 87% favor that. Moreover, this strong support cuts across party lines. Large majorities of Democrats, Republicans, and Independents say they are willing to pay for Social Security for each of these reasons. In the strongest statement of support, 93% of Democrats, 85% of Independents, and 81% of Republicans say they don't mind paying Social Security taxes because of the stability and support the benefits provide to millions of retired Americans, disabled persons, and children and widowed spouses of deceased workers. So in other words, they're saying they don't mind paying for that safety net. And I've stressed and stressed it throughout this episode that Social Security is not a retirement program. It is a safety net, and most people support it. Now, if we privatize it, what does that mean? We get rid of the safety net because now everybody is out there in the market. Everybody has to really kind of play with their own money. And if you want to, like I've said, if you want to do that, if you choose to do that, that's fine. But not everybody is savvy. Not everybody is willing to try to do that. Not everybody wants to work with the market. A lot of people don't even understand how it works. How can you trust somebody to put money into something they don't understand how it works? So this is something that it's pretty simple. A little bit of money comes out of your paycheck. It goes into a fund. You get money when you retire as a safety net. So 93% of Democrats support this, 85% of Independents support it, and 81% of Republicans support it. Now, I understand we don't live in a true democracy. We live in a representative republic. But even in a representative republic, shouldn't the people get what they want some of the time? So, again, let's step away from even talking about privatizing Social Security. Let's frame this discussion about, one, how we can keep it remaining solvent, and two, if we do decide to have an opt-out program, how exactly that's going to work, and, what kind of assurances we can get that the people understand what it means if they do opt out.
For all the days that I have run, I sought to lose that cloud that's blacking out the sun. My train will come some one day soon, and when it comes I'll ride about from night to noon. I feel as if I am looking at the world from the bottom of a well, and I feel as if I am looking at the world from the bottom of a well, and aimless days, uncool ways of defecting, painless face, blacked out thoughts to be rejecting. Lonely, and the only way to beat it is to bat it down, and the only way to beat it is to bat it down, and the only way to beat it is to bat it down. Beat it lonely, and the only way to beat it is to bat it down, and the only way to beat it is to bat it down, and the only way to beat it is to bat it down. Let's get down to business now.
That's going to conclude this episode of Left, Right, in the Middle. I hope that I have demonstrated that Social Security is not in the dire straits that many would have you believe it is in. The trust fund will continue to accrue money until roughly 2017, and under the current structure, the Social Security Administration projects that the trust fund will still pay out until around 2036, after which about 77% of the scheduled benefits will still be able to be met. So if the two sides work together to come to terms on adjustments that could be made to ensure solvency for the next 40 or 50 years, Social Security will continue to work as a safety net that ensures that millions of elderly and disabled Americans don't fall into poverty. Moreover, Social Security does not affect the budget or the deficit, other than the money that the Treasury owes to the Social Security Trust Fund, and this money is owed due to the politicians' unwillingness to properly address the tax code in America. They would rather borrow from the Social Security Trust Fund rather than actually entertain paying for the things we need or what they wanted through sensible taxation. Social Security is not an entitlement program, nor is it an inherently flawed pyramid scheme. The difference between Social Security and an actual pyramid scheme is that Social Security never runs out of new enrollees to sustain the system. People continue to have children. While adjustments to outlays or revenue might be needed depending on population dynamics, the system itself is as inherently sound as the propagation of a new generation is. As I've said, it's a program that does need to be reevaluated, say every 40 to 50 years or so. That's something that each generation should do. And when I say be reevaluated, I don't mean in the sense of killing it or privatizing it. I mean in the sense of a required contribution and retirement age and all those factors that contribute to the program's solvency. But again, Screaming that the sky is falling when we are 20 to 30 years out from being insolvent is not the solution. I want to stress this one more time. Social Security is not designed to be a retirement fund. It is a safety net. One that even 81% of Republicans polled said they don't mind paying taxes for. I think that the two sides should definitely entertain how an opt-out clause might work. If you choose to, you should be able to opt out of Social Security, but only if it is made clear to individuals what the ramifications of opting out are. Things such as being subject to market collapses or reduced pensions that could deplete your retirement account. And of course, the upside is getting a better return than Social Security would provide. However, privatizing should be off the table. It's a non-starter that doesn't move any sensible debate about the issue forward. Social Security has been a successful and well-liked program for 3/4 of a century, and will remain a successful and well-liked program for the foreseeable future, as long as our representatives are willing to work together to make the few minor adjustments that the future solvency requires. So please contact your representatives and urge them to do just that. Links are available at the show's website. The next episode of Left, Right, in the Middle will examine the war on drugs, so join me in 2 weeks for that. Until then, please tell your friends and colleagues about the show, join the conversation on Facebook, and thanks for listening.
Going over this morning's last goodbye. Now I'm marking your progress in the sky. Probably over Lake Michigan. Out the window you're looking out. I don't care where we've been. If I don't figure it, there's nothing to figure out.